All right, so here is the warrant from the house and what was taken out of the house. And, you know, I kind of mentioned in my other video, I do think it's strange how it just says knife here. There's no name. And we do have two other knives noted, the Smith & Wesson pocket knife, and then there was another knife down here noted by brand. And this one up here just says knife. But as I was looking at this more, I do think that the way they release this to us is kind of transcribed and copied over somehow. I don't know if anybody out there has ever worked in law enforcement or anything where you would have maybe transcribed information from a case, but it seems like they maybe took another form here and just copied and filled in just generic information for us. So item 4 right here was the Glock that they seized from the house. And you can see here that it gives us a serial number. And typically with serial numbers on firearms, you can do some research on that. And you can kind of figure out, you know, the history of the gun to some extent, even if you're not the owner of the gun. So here we can see that serial number is written down. It looks like BMKV. It could be an S, Q, and then it almost looks like an I or a 1, right? You can see it's really messy. And that's one thing about this warrant. It's just so messy and hard to read. It's almost like they're trolling us, you know, with the information that they're telling us here. But if we look down at the other item, the way they have listed the Glock receipt, and this is most likely the same weapon, of course, you can see it's BMKV, and that looks like an S, O, or 01, right? So there's two serial numbers here that are referring to the same firearm, and it's concerning because it's just sloppy, right? We have a pretty serious crime here, and they're gathering evidence, and they're recovering a gun here, and they're not even writing down the same serial number, right? It's a mismatch. So maybe one person wrote it down one way and another person wrote it another, or one person saw it in person and one person saw a photo of that firearm. But it's just bothersome, you know, when you see that. So anyway, when I was trying to look into this weapon and determine maybe when Bryan could have purchased it, I had just reached out here to Glock customer service, and I sent them both of those serial numbers. So I sent them the BMKVSQ1 and the BMKVS01, and they replied back that neither of those numbers were valid, right? So that's kind of what I was getting at here. We had two serial numbers written down, and neither of them were correct according to Glock. They're looking up in their system to determine if that's the correct number. So they did give me some feedback though, and they said that it would most likely be 4 letters and 3 numbers. And so going off of that, I'm thinking most likely it's BMKV 501. So I sent that to them, and you can see here they responded that that firearm was imported on August 28th of 2020. So imported means that it was most likely made in Austria, and then it was shipped here to the United States. And so that's all they can tell us is really the import date on what that was. So when we know that, at least we know that if there were any cases before 8/28, you know, that whether or not that would be connected to that weapon, right? If there was any crime that happened, you know, you can look from August 28th further. So most likely that gun was bought, you know, August 28th or later. If it was imported on August 28th, I don't know if it would have been bought right away. So maybe, you know, September of 2020 it would be kind of the earliest timeline that Bryan would have been in possession of that. And I think that is when he was working as a security guard at the high school. Now, I don't think they allow security guards to carry firearms, right, at the high school there. So he wouldn't have been purchasing that for his security guard job there. But if he was pursuing maybe a career in law enforcement, he might have bought that ahead of time to practice with, or he wanted to own it. It is a very popular handgun with police officers, that 40 caliber Glock 22. So it makes sense that he might have been interested in that gun. But Anyway, we did narrow it down to it arriving in August of 2020, so it had to have been after that date that he would have purchased it. So if we look at the house here and you read the warrant, here's the warrant with Bryan. And so it's interesting because it talks about seeing the car, driving by the house and then parking in front of the house. And so they obviously have video footage of the vehicle arriving at the crime scene and moving around. And then there's that picture that we've seen where they're looking at the skid marks of the tire tracks, right, out in front of the house, where early on, there was that image where they were measuring, it looked like the tire marks on the ground, and it would have been just right in front of the house. But they don't mention that at all in the warrant here. They didn't talk about any tire tracks or anything like that, and it's interesting we saw them looking at that. But it makes me wonder if those tire tracks were related. A Hyundai Elantra, a 2015 Hyundai Elantra, I mean, it's not a sports car necessarily, and you would really have to stomp on the gas in order to get it to peel out, right, and make skid marks. I don't even know if it would, especially on a downhill slope like that. So I don't know if those skid marks are going to be related to that Elantra, but you have to ask, now that they have the car, is that something that they're going to be able to match as well? We haven't really heard much about that. Hasn't been noted anywhere. They didn't say they recovered tire marks or anything, but they were looking at it. So, we'll have to wait and see if the vehicle tires are connected to that in any way. But jumping back over here to the house, this pretty much right here, let me blow this up. This would have been just about where, the vehicle would have been parked based off of them taking pictures of the tire tracks, right? It was right around here in this spot. So it appears that Bryan would have parked, right in front of the house here, which is interesting, that he wouldn't have parked. Yeah, I remember when this first happened and I saw the pictures of the house before they had captured anybody. And I thought for sure that whoever did it would have parked back here, behind these trees on this hill. It seemed just like the perfect spot. But once again, when we have Bryan here, who is supposedly this criminology, going for his PhD, and he's doing all these unusual things in this crime. It's very strange. I think that's what makes this case so interesting, is just kind of so many unusual angles to it. So based off of what they say, they see him parking in front of the house. So he must have approached the house, from the front here, and he either went around to the right or went around to the left. I kind of lean that he went around to the right. And then you have that house there, right here to the right, the next door neighbor. And this is supposedly where they got this audio from. That was, there was audio that was released for a short period of time there. And then it was said that wasn't the audio. We don't know, but it is listed in the warrant that they do have audio, right? It mentions the dog barking, a loud thud. And so there is some sort of audio, and we assume it's from this house we know because it's noted as being from this house here. So I don't know where that video footage is coming from that they have of the car, if it's from this apartment complex over here, because they mention the vehicle passing by the apartment complex over here. So it's possible that the video footage is coming from down here. But he entered, he approached the house probably to the right, I think, but possible he went around to the left all the way around. It seems to me like he would have maybe walked up through here and come around this way. And I don't know if maybe this house over here maybe had picked up any sort of audio even at that point. We don't know how much audio they have. But you can see here, this room right here with the window would be Xana's room. And you can see how close it is to that house. And so there's a good chance that audio picked up a good amount of what was going on in Xana's room. And then just above that up here would have been Kaylee's room, where Murphy was, the dog. And if he were barking, again, that's on the same side here. So, that audio that was released that was supposedly debunked, you could hear the dog barking, you could hear kind of, some screams and things, and it would make sense, with those two rooms being on this side of the house near that home, that it would have picked up that sound. So let me know what you think about that, though. Do you think he approached the house kind of coming around the right side here, around this cop car, or would he have gone around the left there to try to hide in the shadows, and go around the back on that side? Always interested to hear what you guys think about this stuff. I, just sharing my thoughts here, and I love hearing the feedback, and everybody has so many good ideas. Everybody's so smart, and I love reading through all the comments. I try to read as many as I can, so I really appreciate it. So keep them coming, keep the comments coming, share your thoughts. That's what we're here for. I really like to hear what everybody else thinks, and then kind of add that to my ideas, and it really helps us kind of try to make sense of it all. That's part of the challenge here. But so again, I think he went around the right. Now, the warrant kind of talks through the police officers arriving at the house and then entering through the first floor here. So we'll go in through that way and then kind of work our way up. So there was a vacant room right as you walk in the front door here, this vacant room on the right-hand side. We don't know for sure, but this most likely was that roommate that we've heard of that lived here that had moved out. And I did think it was curious that there's some pictures of Bryan's attorney when she visited this house. She went there and took photographs, and they were spending some time right at that front door and taking pictures of the window. And I also noticed just the Idaho State Police forensic who had showed up. They were also spending some time at that front door and at that window. So they're probably looking everywhere, checking everything. But we have a vacant room here with a window there. It's a possible point of entry, potentially. Of course, we assume that the second floor, that sliding glass door that would have been unlocked, is most likely the entry point. I agree with that, but there is the possibility if that window were unlocked, they were checking that. But I think it's interesting that both Idaho State Police were seen, photographed right in that front, that front window area right over here. Let me see if I can. Yeah, here we go. We can get over here so it's right. It's a little slow. So this window here, which is right there at the front of the house in this vacant bedroom, they were paying pretty good attention to that. I still think it's more likely he entered through the sliding door, but maybe there's more to the story. Maybe there's video footage, right, of somebody walking up to that window and trying to open it as they walked around that corner. We don't know. They could have a lot more than we're aware of. So this would have been Bethany's room, and this is where we assume that she was sleeping, right? And this is the opposite end of the house on the first floor. So it makes sense that she wouldn't have heard as much necessarily, right, as Dylan being right around the corner upstairs. So Bethany's room is down here. Here is a bathroom, and then there's a laundry room right here, just off of Bethany's room. Door doesn't open, but we have an image here. So there's a laundry room. Here's Bethany's room, and there's this kind of built-in over here where she may have had, even if this is still here, could have had clothes hanging in there if that's how it's laid out. If we don't know how it's laid out, but if her bed was on that opposite wall, she would have been on the opposite side of the house of where Ethan and Xana were, and then 2 floors down from Kaylee and Maddie. So we'll circle back out and then head up the stairs. Okay, so this is the living room. It's not huge, it's not tiny, but the thing that really stands out to me here is it's wood floors. So it seems to me like sound would travel pretty well, especially if a fight broke out. Two people were being assaulted right here. You know, I do think there would be some noise associated with this. So this would have been Xana's bedroom where Ethan and Xana were found in the living room. So if Bryan had entered through the kitchen back here around this corner, gone upstairs, come downstairs, he would have come around this corner here and went down this hallway towards Xana's bedroom. I think it's likely, it's possible anyway, that he encountered Ethan or Xana. I'm thinking Xana right around this area here as he was coming down. Somebody may have been coming around this corner to investigate a sound, and maybe he saw them, or but we don't know. Somebody in this room, in Xana's room, Ethan or Xana, could have been a target too. There's so many unanswered questions, but if you kind of look at it from the idea that he was trying to sneak in and out and target maybe one person, and then things unraveled from there. When he was coming downstairs and intending to leave, did he encounter somebody around this corner here, and maybe chase Xana down here into this hallway and attack here, and then it kind of spilled into the bedroom area. But again, we don't know exactly where. It said that they were inside the bedroom there, but it's one of two things, right? He either came down and he was intending to leave and somebody saw him, and so he turned and went after them, or he planned to go after that person on purpose. It's one of the two, right? So this is that kind of hallway that leads into Xana's bedroom, and you can see here it's very tight quarters. It's not a large bedroom by any means, and so it's assumed that Xana was maybe found here. Okay, so you can see kind of the way the walls are laid out, if the bed were tucked in here, and we think that the other person was found either in the bed or could have even been on the floor here. Just on the other side of this wall would have been where there's that picture of the blood kind of coming out onto the foundation. So it's possible that somebody was against this wall or had bled down that back headboard of the bed there. Small room. So, if people are fighting in here, it would be fast, I think, because it's such close quarters, but I do think there would be some noise involved, especially in this hallway. I think there's a very good chance that Dylan would have heard quite a bit of what was happening based off of knowing that she was kind of waking up and hearing things, and she was probably paying attention. I think that's a big part of why we're not hearing more about those hours and more information about that. I think there is more there to that story on what she told law enforcement. We have the basics of a shadowy figure with bushy eyebrows leaving the building, but there's follow-up questions to that, right? It's a conversation that's happening, and it's not just kind of, okay, what did you see? Well, I saw a guy with bushy eyebrows leaving. There's going to be follow-up questions, and she's going to be telling every detail that she can, and law enforcement's going to be asking her all of these things. What did you have in your hand, or what did he have in his hand? What was he wearing? Did you see what kind of jacket he was wearing? All of those details they're going to be asking, not just a shadowy figure. Okay, good, that's good enough for us, right? So this is where that footprint would have been left, according to the warrant. It was right outside of Dylan's bedroom, so this would have been Dylan's bedroom right here, this door. So you can see it's just right around the corner from where Xana's room is. Hardwood floors. There's also this picture that or this decoration they have hanging on the wall that would have been illuminated. According to some of the pictures of the crime scene, it looks like this was on or plugged in. And so that could have been causing some light. And I think even on the back porch there might have been some lights hanging that could have been on and creating light. So it may not have been as dark as we assume, when everything was happening. There might have been, if she saw his face enough to describe his eyebrows, it was probably light enough as the person was coming around this corner leaving. There was most likely some light here. I don't know. This can make it kind of go dark for us. I don't know if it would have been this dark necessarily. Right, so if that were illuminating the room, maybe some lights coming from that sliding door kitchen area, it might have been brighter than what we think. All right. So here is a link. I'm not going to play it, but it's a link to a TikTok video that shows this decoration in the background. So let's take a look at the kitchen here, and we'll see where the entry point would have been. So here's the presumed entry point, the back sliding glass door. Not very far, right, to get from that sliding door to come to this staircase at night. You could kind of cautiously, come through here and maybe paying attention to see if anybody is awake, and then kind of slip around this corner. We don't know what the heck he was thinking, but, coming in this door here, we assume that he started on the 3rd floor. Again, we don't know, but it kind of makes sense that he would have started on the 3rd floor. So he would have come upstairs here. Yeah, possible he had a flashlight. So right here is would have been Kaylee's old room. My opinion, I do think Kaylee most likely was sleeping in her room. I've seen that picture, and there is a picture of Kaylee's bed being, you can see it through the window, and it looks like the covers are kind of flipped back. We haven't really gotten, I've heard that some people say she moved out, and I get that she moved out, but I think it's possible that her furniture still would have been here, because where would she put it? Why would she pay for storage or something like that? She's a college student. She would most likely leave her stuff here until she's moving, rather than take it all out and then take it with her, or put it in storage before taking it with her. I don't know if she had already moved into the apartment where she was going to and had already moved her stuff. I don't know, but I did see that picture, and it has a bed that you can see through that window. So I'm kind of going with that I do think there was a bed in there. And if there was a bed in there, I think it's more likely she would have been sleeping in her own bed. I get that they're friends. It's not unusual that friends would, when they're spending the night or something like that and they're hanging out, that they would share a bed falling asleep. I don't think that's unusual. I just don't think that's the case here. I think if Kaylee had her own bed there and she had Murphy, she would have been in her room sleeping in her bed, and Maddie would have been in her bed. Maddie didn't have this huge bed. It would have been more comfortable just to sleep in their own bed, even if you're close friends. Again, it's not unusual for friends to do that, but in my opinion, I think Kaylee was sleeping in her own room with Murphy and heard an encounter happening with Bryan, and then came out of this room and shut the door behind her and left Murphy there, and then came over here to investigate what she may have heard was going on. The other idea is, she was stirred by Murphy, wasn't quite aware of what was happening here in Maddie's room, went to the bathroom and maybe encountered Bryan on her way out. In the warrant, it mentions that as they're heading to Maddie's room, the one officer points out the bathroom, which is interesting because, why would you point out the bathroom before going to the crime scene unless there was something about the bathroom that he was referencing, like, oh, look, the attack started in the bathroom, there might be blood there, and the blood trail kind of carried into the bedroom, and that's where they found them. There could be a broken door. Remember, there's that thud that we heard, or that's described in the warrant in the audio. So we don't know what that thud is. I've heard, the idea that maybe it was somebody hitting the ground. I don't know if that would necessarily be a huge thud, but maybe somebody hitting their shoulder against a door and, kind of busting a door open after somebody saw them. Maybe, I'm just, speculating, but if Kaylee had come out of her room either to investigate what she heard in Maddie's room, she could have gone straight to the room, or she could have gone here to the bathroom. I don't know, but you can see here how close it is. And I wonder if maybe that encounter could have started here and then carried into the bedroom, as she retreated from the attack, if she had come out and maybe they encountered each other here. But because if you'll see here, if Bryan were in Maddie's room, when Kaylee came in, you can see how tight it is. So if Kaylee was standing here and Bryan was standing in here, Kaylee would have probably fled out the door away from the bed. So it's interesting that she was, found on the bed. And so when you think of that, I think that maybe the attack started kind of in that hallway, and then in her trying to get away from him, maybe kind of retreated into the room where he came in and then kind of kept attacking her. And that could have been some of the noise that Dylan was hearing downstairs. Just some ideas here. It's interesting as we walk through the house here and look at everything, and you see how it's laid out. It kind of pieces together, the thoughts on it. So again, you can see how small it is. This is, presumably, he said it was found on the right side. The knife sheath was found on the right side of Madison when viewing the bed from the door. So I'm thinking it would have been where this red circle is. Actually, this is just a marker that shows us an image there of the knife sheath. Okay. So if Bryan were to have entered here, come around the bed, like I said, he would have been potentially standing here while the attacks were happening on Maddie. And if Kaylee had come in the door here, you can see, right, there's not a lot of room here. We don't know if there's a desk here. This is just kind of an image, but even if there wasn't a desk here and somebody were standing here and Kaylee came in this room, she could retreat out, right, and down the stairs, or to different places, to the bathroom. So potentially, maybe she saw him and ran out to the bathroom. I don't know. I think you'd most likely try to flee downstairs and get out, but we don't know how it unfolded. But I just think it's strange, when you think of Kaylee in the bed, if Bryan were standing here and she came in, would she have fled away? So I wonder if maybe that encounter started in the hallway, and that's kind of based off the theory that she was sleeping in her own bed. If in fact she was sleeping in Maddie's bed with her, that's possible, right? That he just came in and they were both there, and he just attacked them both right there. We don't know. I think it's both scenarios are possible, and we may never know. And that's kind of this other case I'm going to mention here in this video. Is similar. There's a point of entry in that case as well, and nobody really knew exactly how the crime was committed, and to this day we still don't quite know exactly how that person got in and out of the house. And it's very similar to this case. We may never know exactly how it unfolded inside the house, because only one person really knows, and it depends on if they're going to tell us or not. So if Bryan had come up the stairs and went straight to Maddie's room, It wouldn't have taken that long, I think, to attack Maddie. I mean, probably a matter of seconds, depending on what he was doing, but Kaylee as well. Those attacks wouldn't have taken long. So when we talk about the timeline of, let's say he entered the home at, say, like 4:06 or so, because I think they mentioned 4:04 approximately is when we see the vehicle showing up. So say 4:06 maybe is when he's entering the house. These are just approximate numbers. We've seen how messy the information is that they release to us, so those timelines could be way off as far as we know. But say 4:04 and then they see him leaving at 4:20. 16 minutes is plenty of time to commit this crime. That's a long time to attack somebody with a knife. So the timeline there, even if the attack started at 4:12, like if you look at it from the idea that maybe Xana and that 4:12 timeline with being on TikTok could have tied in with the start of the crimes, even 4:12 to 4:20ish, 4:19, very possible that this crime could be committed in that time frame. It doesn't take very long at all for an attack like that to happen. Even 5 minutes is a very long time when you talk about that type of thing. So here's a view from the stairwell that you can see that footprint. So this would have been the exit point where, if Bryan were fleeing down the stairs and he came down to the bottom of the stairs here, we would have had possibly somebody coming around the corner here that he witnessed, possibly somebody in the kitchen that encountered him. But at this point right here, he has that decision, right? Like in that video I posted, where does he turn left and escape, or does he turn right and continue to attack the other people in the house? And we don't know why he turned right, but he ended up going down here to Xana's room and then attacking them, and then came around this corner where Dylan would have seen him passing by here. So pretty close, pretty close view there. The other thing we don't know about is, could there have been more said? Could there have been more of an encounter there with Dylan and Bryan? Could he have talked to her more, mentioned more? Did she shut the door and he tried to get in? There could be more just to that piece of it, where she just says she kind of stood there in a frozen shock phase. That's kind of whoever wrote down that information's wording. I don't know if she would have said those words, "Oh, I stood there in a frozen shock phase." She was probably describing being shocked and standing there, but I don't know if that's exactly what she said. So the person who's taking that report put that, and you can even see it's in parentheses, right, saying frozen shock phase. So we don't know. We don't know what happened, and there could definitely have been even more of an interaction there as he was leaving the house. So the idea is that he would have gone out the back door, and then law enforcement even said that when they arrived, the back door was open. So we wonder if the person who committed the crime left the door open, or could the people who have come over to the house before law enforcement left the door open. So I think that's gonna be something that might be challenged at some point. It's with those extra people coming over to the house. But if the perpetrator left the door open and Dylan was in her room, remember, it was really cold that night. They would have noticed how cold it was if their sliding door had been left open with it. You can see in that grub truck video kind of people joking about how cold it is. And so if that back door had been left open and Dylan's room is right here, her room would have been very cold, and she would have noticed that. So it's just a strange, the whole way it all unfolded is very strange, and there's so many questions, and we just don't have all of the evidence and all of the pieces to the puzzle to kind of answer it all, so we kind of have to come up with our own ideas. So he would have fled out the back door here. And then interesting, that his car was parked, and they talk about seeing his car kind of drive in and turn around, and it even mentions in the warrant, it parks in front of the house. It does attempts to do a 3-point turn or park in front of the house. Could they even have video of him getting out of the car and walking up to the house and coming back to the car. I mean, it sounds like they have a lot of video footage. They see him driving right by the house and parking. You know, do they have his face on camera? They're pretty confident, right, about their evidence. Even when they requested the warrant in the probable cause affidavit, they specifically say, please do not consider the DNA evidence in approving the warrant, because in case the DNA evidence is disputed and found to be, not able to be submitted in court, then they don't need it, right? They have enough without the DNA. So, I mean, like I said, do they have him on camera getting in and out of the car? Potentially. They have him on camera apparently parking, so why wouldn't they be able to see the person getting in and out of the car, unless the camera was turning off and on like it was a motion thing? But just makes you wonder, how much video evidence do they talk about his escape route afterward, and they know kind of where he exited the neighborhood, because there were so many cameras from houses and businesses. They figured out, because they looked at camera footage and they didn't see him, and then so they know that he would have exited out through another area. But with all the businesses, there's no businesses right here. So when they mention businesses with camera footage, there's a lot of footage out there. So could one of those cameras have gotten a good clear picture of the person driving, or even here in front of the house? Could they have more than we know? Because again, they don't need the DNA. That's just kind of extra, according to what they're saying. They're saying we have enough, and we didn't see all of what they have. That's what they gave. They gave that to the judge, right? And they were saying, hey, here's everything we have. We need the warrant so we can prove our case, and here's the evidence. But please don't look at this DNA. We don't need this DNA. We have enough right here with all of this other stuff to get us the warrant. And then the judge is like, yeah, okay, I'm approving this warrant without considering that DNA piece of it, right? So they've got to have something there. So there's this case, and this is from, I believe, 2002. Yeah, I think it was February 7th of, it was February 2nd in 2002. So the reason that I like to, that I'm kind of connected to this case is I lived near this area when this happened. And this was in 2002. So this was when kind of social media was picking up, and this was one of the very early cases where you could go to, a chat room and you could kind of debate the case and share ideas in a chat room about what was happening. And this was one of those cases, just like this case with Bryan Kohberger, where there were so many unanswered questions, and there was a lot of controversy around the family involved, and it just really reminds me of this case that we're studying right now. And so I wanted to kind of talk through this and just share this with you, because it was a very interesting case. And I remember, I used to go into chat rooms back then, and we would try to figure out, how David Westerfield entered the home and abducted Danielle Van Dam, and it's still unanswered today. They didn't find any DNA or anything like that inside the house, and there was a lot of other questions and things behind this case. But essentially, David Westerfield, so this took place in a suburb called Poway, California. And Poway here is, you can see this is the coast in California, and Poway is kind of it's a mix, but this particular neighborhood where this crime happened was like an upper middle class neighborhood. You had people, like engineers who lived there, somewhat, not super rich, not poor, but, kind of a nice neighborhood, families and things. And so, and then just east of Poway, if you were to head out here along this highway, eventually you kind of get out here into the desert, and so it's kind of a recreational area where a lot of people will go and ride, drive dune buggies and ride motorcycles and things. And so that kind of it's part of this case here with that route here that heads out there. So what happened was on the night of February 1st of 2002, Danielle's mom, Brenda, and her friends were out at a bar in Poway, and it was called Dad's. It's kind of a small bar. And Danielle's dad and then her two brothers were at home hanging out while mom was out with her friends at the bar, having a good time. Well, the interesting thing here is David Westerfield was at that bar with them. And so there was these theories going around out there that there was like some connection, with him. And because the Van Dams were both kind of rumored to be swingers. And so this kind of outing with the friends, the rumor was that it was this kind of swinger outing. And then this David Westerfield guy was trying to kind of move in on the group, and try to get accepted into this group. And so they're out at the bar and he's there, and there's witnesses there that said he was pretty intoxicated, and that kind of ties in to a pattern apparently with him from his past as well. But he was intoxicated, and so that was kind of something curious about the case also, because if he were to sneak in and sneak out of the house and he were really intoxicated, then somebody who's really drunk would be more clumsy and stuff. So that just kind of added another variable when you tried to figure out how this person would have snuck in and snuck out of the house undetected. So the rumor was that he was at this bar. He was with Danielle Van Dam's mom hanging out, and they eventually came back home. And so Danielle's dad had been watching her and the other kids, and when they came home, they noticed that there was this light flashing for their security system on the garage door. But they didn't really think much of it because the garage was well traveled. They would go in and out of the garage. And then back in 2002, there was a little more controversy around this, but Danielle's dad had admitted that night he had been going into the garage and smoking marijuana. And so there was a lot of kind of shade cast on him for being irresponsible and, maybe leaving the door open. There was a lot of different theories there, but he definitely got beat up a little bit about that. And he, when he admitted that and was kind of talking through what happened that night. So we had Brenda out with her friends. We had Danielle's dad watching her and the kids and kind of doing his own thing. And then Brenda comes home, and then they all kind of hang out for a while in the living room. And then eventually those friends leave. Now, there were rumors about what they were doing during that visit. This case was really wild, just like this Kohberger case. There was all kinds of theories going around. So eventually they leave, and then everybody goes to bed. Well, they wake up the next morning, and Danielle's missing. And so it was a big media frenzy that morning. And I remember waking up and watching the news and seeing the news crews, on site there in the neighborhood. And they were, kind of doing the story on this girl that was missing. And they were, the neighbors were kind of coming out and talking to the newscasters. And so right away, everybody was aware of this case. Well, it was really interesting because David Westerfield was a neighbor of Danielle. So he lived just a couple doors down from her. And so she and him knew each other from the neighborhood, and her parents knew him. She had actually sold Girl Scout cookies to him at one point, and just recently before the crime happened had been to his house and sold Girl Scout cookies to him with her mom. And they went into the house and they were talking and visiting with David Westerfield. And so that was another kind of angle when the trial happened, when you talk about DNA and hair and things like that being transferred. These were all things that the defense had leveraged. So I think this case is going to come down to a lot of experts, kind of how this case was when they're testifying and they're explaining the science behind, how DNA evidence is transferred, whether it's hair. Even in this case with Danielle Van Dam, they found animal hair from her dog that tied David Westerfield to her. So we have a similar thing here with the Kohberger case, where they're going to have potentially dog hair. It says in that warrant from Bryan's apartment that they have a possible dog hair. We don't know what dog, but that could be big. So everybody goes to sleep. The next morning, Danielle's missing, and everybody's in a frenzy. The news is interviewing everybody. And there's one person in the neighborhood missing, and it's David Westerfield, right? He's gone, and he's got this big, nice RV motorhome, and he's gone, you know, right after this happens. It's one of, I think, the only people who, you know, who wasn't in the neighborhood that lived there. So he's gone for a while, and then eventually he comes back, and law enforcement is all over the neighborhood. You know, they're interviewing everybody, and they've got their eye on him, of course, because he disappeared right after the crime. And it was really interesting, though, because he had actually interviewed with a news station in the neighborhood as he was driving in and talking to them, and then later on, you know, he became a suspect. So I wasn't able to find that footage. I'm going to try to continue to look for it, but he actually spoke to the news station there right in the neighborhood right after the crime. So the interesting thing, though, was he disappeared for a couple days, and he told this story that he took his motorhome and he went out into the desert and spent some time by himself. And there were some witnesses who saw him. He actually went out to what's called Silver Strand State Beach, and he had paid in advance for a 2-night stay there. But then he left, and he kind of told this story that it was too cold. So right away, his whole kind of timeline was weird. You know, he'd kind of put together this story of he was going to go and just hang out and kind of take a little vacation, but then he was all over the place, and so he had to piece together excuses. But witnesses saw him, you know, at that Silver Strand State Beach, and so everybody assumes that Danielle was in that motorhome with him. And, you know, nobody knows really for sure how long she was alive, but he took her out, you know, in that motorhome and drove around to this Silver Strand State Beach. Well, then he went out into the desert, and there were some witnesses who found him stuck out in the desert in his motorhome. And so, you know, a tow truck came out and pulled him out. So they had that kind of timeline and that proof that, you know, where he was, and with that tow truck being out there. And then they had him on video coming in and dropping stuff off at the dry cleaners right after the crime. So he comes back, and, you know, they're on to him and they're interviewing him. And there's a really interesting story about one of the detectives on the case. And she had went over to talk to David Westerfield, and she kind of told the story of how he was almost trying to kind of flirt with her and come on to her. And it was rumored that David Westerfield was kind of aggressive in that way, and very hypersexual type person. And this detective kind of describes that she was, you know, going over there to interview him with her partner, and, you know, she was kind of playing the good cop role, you know, and connecting with him, and then her partner is just kind of fading off into the shadows and trying to pay attention. But she tells this interesting part of the story where she goes upstairs as they're going through his house, and she happens to go into the bathroom, and she noticed that because he's just a couple doors down from where Danielle lives, and she notices the screen door, or the screen on the window, is like pressed out a little bit, you know, like if somebody were pressing their face against the screen. And as she put her face up against that spot on the screen, it was a direct view right into Danielle Van Damme's room. And, you know, it appeared that David Westerfield could have just been right there in that bathroom and looking out and seeing into her room there. And then they actually found this picture in his house. I believe it was cut out of a magazine or a shopping catalog, and it was of this bedroom set, and it was like an identical bedroom set of what was in Danielle Van Damme's room. So they had a pretty good hunch that something was going on there. But really interesting story told by that detective, and how she kind of connected with him a little bit and was able to get some inside views of that. And then there were some other clues as well that they started piecing together there was a hose that was kind of left out in the yard, and his yard was really neat and well kept, but for whatever reason, the hose was hurriedly put away, and then they found out that he had spent some time cleaning up his motorhome. Well, even though he cleaned up his motorhome, the clothes that he had dropped off at the dry cleaner were recovered at this point, and they found a drop of blood on his jacket, and then eventually inside the motorhome they found a drop of blood that matched Danielle Van Dam, and that was really unexplainable. What they tried to do is he tried to kind of the defense tried to kind of explain it as he was popular in the neighborhood and he would leave his motorhome door open and the kids would go in and out and play, and something could have happened and she cut herself while she was in there playing with the other kids in the neighborhood, because they also found other evidence in the motorhome. They found a handprint from Danielle Van Dam in the bedroom area of the motorhome. So they tried to kind of cover that stuff up with that excuse that anybody could have gone in and out of the motorhome. But they found her blood. They found some other fibers as well. They found carpet fibers. Now this was 2002, and they were very good at finding a lot of evidence, that they were able to extract DNA from. And we're 2023 now, and so I'm sure our technology has advanced quite a bit. And so when we look at the Bryan Kohberger case, I think that they're going to have a good amount of evidence to work with, and we're going to be surprised, I think, at how much they've pulled, I think, from the crime scene and potentially from his apartment, depending on how messy he was. I have questions, not to jump over to that case, but I have questions, with him putting everything in baggies that we've heard about, putting his trash in baggies, how much thought he put into getting rid of the evidence. He may have covered things up pretty well, but... So the thing with this David Westerfield case, though, that was kind of groundbreaking at the time was they brought in some entomologists, because eventually what happened was they retraced David Westerfield's tracks after he left the crime scene, and he had went out to the desert, like I mentioned. He had driven out Interstate 8, and so they were kind of looking along that area, and eventually they found Danielle kind of at this dump site off the road where people would pull over and throw old sofas, right, or old refrigerators. One of those sites, where it's just kind of off of a secluded area, and people, load up their truck bed and kind of a little dump in the. And so he had left Danielle there and kind of covered her up. Well, the defense was trying to say that she had been there for a short period of time, and so it was impossible for David Westerfield to have left her there because he was in custody. And the reason they were saying that is because they were looking at the fly larvae and the flies and kind of how far they had advanced and evolved. And so the defense was saying, well, look, they're only this old, and so she could have only been there for a week, and then the prosecution was bringing in experts, and they were disputing that information. And so kind of like what I was talking about with this Kohberger case, there's going to be all kinds of experts in this trial kind of going head to head. You're going to have experts for the defense and you're going to have experts for the prosecution, and they're going to get up there and they're going to give their opinion, and then the jury is going to have to decide who they believe, right, and what makes more sense, just like in this case. And so you had them kind of disputing the life cycle of these flies, and the prosecution was essentially saying, well, this is kind of like the second generation, right? And so they were able to show all of the different stages of the fly development and kind of prove that she had actually been there, right after the crime happened, longer than what the defense was saying. But it was a big deal back then, this was kind of new to everybody, especially people on the jury, and so everybody was really sucked into the science behind the case, and that's kind of why I'm bringing this up, is because I do think with Bryan Kohberger, there's going to be a kind of a groundbreaking type of science that we're going to learn about, not the DNA side of things, but I think with the technology side of things. So with Bryan and the online following and potentially online stalking of the victims, we don't know how much out there, how much data is out there that they can recover because Bryan is very well versed in cloud forensics, and so he would understand how to cover up his tracks online. And that's why I think this case is going to be very interesting, because what are they going to be able to dig up on his activity, or were there any things that he did to scrub that history? There's been quite a few mistakes made, so I would guess that there's something out there. But I think this case with Bryan Kohberger is going to be very groundbreaking in the technology side, and when we have experts disputing, when you talk about the cell phone pings, you're going to have experts getting up there and proving their point. So we'll see how that plays out in the trial as it comes up. Now, this case, the other thing that I think about with this case when I relate it to Bryan Kohberger is during the trial in the David Westerfield, Danielle Van Dam case, so they eventually found CP on David Westerfield's computer. And so during the trial, he actually tried to blame that on his son. So his son lived with him. He was 18 or so, I think. But he would try to, during the trial, when they discovered those things on David Westerfield's computer, he essentially blamed his son. And they were almost just trying to create that doubt, right, within the jury that maybe it was so bad that it was almost like he was trying to point the finger at his son of being the suspect, and it wasn't him, just to try to get off for committing the crime. And but that was one angle that they kind of took to try to explain away what they found on his computer. But back in 2002, they were able to pull that stuff out of the PCs and things like that. And so I'm sure they're very good these days at being able to dig up data online. Now, the interesting thing, though, with cloud forensics is what it does is it takes information and sends it all over to different storage facilities, different servers, and stores this data there so it's ready for quick access for everybody. And so that data, for example, can go into another jurisdiction. There could be a server in another country, for example, and that data could be in that country and not accessible for us to get to. And so there's little things like that could come into play. I don't know if that would apply here, what Bryan was doing, but when you talk about cloud servers, somebody who's really well versed with that kind of stuff would understand, where the data goes and how it's stored, and potentially might even know about hardware and devices to scrub that information. So I do think that there's going to be a technology angle when we talk about the Bryan Kohberger case, similar to the bug angle that they talked about with this Danielle Van Dam case. So they arrested him and they went to trial, and he ended up getting sentenced to the death penalty. But he still hasn't been executed. This is in California, so it's unknown when that may happen. So that brings us to an interesting topic with Bryan Kohberger as well. His attorney just requested that a second death-certified defense attorney be appointed to Bryan Kohberger's team, and it was approved. And so it sounds to me like they're definitely going to trial, right? They're going to fight it if she's got the inside track in talking to Bryan and what his intentions are, and if she's requesting a second death certified attorney to join the team, that tells me they're getting ready to go, and he's not going to be pleading guilty. I also wonder if it's a protection thing too, to ensure that there's another person there. So I don't know if there could be something down the road about a mistrial or something like that, but having two experts on the case that are both death certified is probably beneficial. The other thing, though, on that is I think that I think Ann Taylor, Bryan's attorney, has been told very clearly that they are going to be pursuing the death penalty here. I think that the Kaylee's family has been very clear on that, and so I think that could be part of it. I think that they've got that confirmation that that's happening, and so she's getting ready for that defense by getting somebody else on board that can help her navigate that. let me know what you think about it. I hope that the house view was helpful. I know, we're all trying to figure out what happened, and so just walking through and looking at the scene kind of helps it make sense. I do think there was probably more noise. All right, well, I hope everybody enjoyed the live stream here. Sorry about the technology issues. I'll get that fixed for my next stream. I think my system here with I have some hotkeys set up, and I think it just locked up on me, and I didn't have time to fix it here. So I'll get that figured out, and the next live stream I'll be able to kind of get that presentation to you like I intended to tonight. I appreciate you hanging in there with me and hanging out with me while we talked about the case here. Really appreciate you watching. Please subscribe if you think you'll really enjoy that as we talk through some of the case a little bit more. But again, thank you for watching, and I will see you very soon. I'm going to have a couple of videos